Chapter 1. Raquel goes to school. Sunset brought Raquel to the towers, that fashionable school for girls whose turrets overlooked the Hudson. The glow behind her seemed to have lingered to introduce this child of the land of sunshine. It seemed to burnish the dowdy little figure sitting so stiffly in the sedan. Yet she resolutely kept her back to the west, for to see it made her homesick. This was all so different. No wonder a calf bawled for its mother when they took it away. 3 days' travel from Texas had put a whole world between Raquel and Lowe's ranchos, the Sunset Limited speeding her back over plains that the covered wagon of her grandparents had not crossed in 3 months, journeying. And here she was rolling up a drive toward high iron gates. She leaned forward to peer through. It was even more imposing than she had imagined, this feudal castle in its beautiful grounds, all splashed with the reds and golds of autumn. Lights were already glowing within the school. The pupils of the towers always dressed for dinner, and Raquel could see girlish figures passing and repassing before the windows in their soft-colored frocks. She had never been so afraid of anything in her life as of the prospect of this new world. She was trembling with nervousness. 2 girls stood for a moment in one of the windows, each with an arm around the other's waist. How happy they seemed. Oh, of course she would love school. Homesickness fell away. Raquel leaned forward, sat on the edge of the seat in her eagerness to be inside among those cheerful groups. The girls of the Mrs. Carter's school, watching from the windows as the sedan came to a stop at the entrance, saw a slight figure in a badly fitting suit swing out of the car the moment Jeems opened the door. Before he could stoop for her old calfskin bags, the new girl had seized them herself, and with a bulging piece of luggage in each hand, leaped up the steps ahead of him. There was a rush from the drawing-room windows. The next moment she was standing in the hall, eager eyes on the faces filling the doorway. They looked mighty pretty. Then the bags dropped to the floor with a thump. A lean hand was thrust out to enclose the plump white one of the younger Miss Carter, and a soft Texan voice was drawling, "Howdy, ma'am. I sure am glad to be here." Then, striding after the floating form of the younger Miss Carter, the new girl was gone up the wide staircase. The cowgirl from Texas, or the girl of the Golden West, laughed a mischievous voice. "That your new roommate, Lois?" Lois Wainwright shook a blonde head, her pretty face hardened. "Not if I can help it. I can get along without her in my young life. As a matter of fact, I didn't come here to be forced into any such association." "Oh, come, Loy, don't be a snob." A long-legged, handsome girl spoke from the depths of an easy chair where she sprawled with a book. "Besides, what do you know about that girl? She's probably a peach. And she may be the very person that you may need most in your young life, old kiddo." Upstairs, Raquel Daniels followed Miss Josephine Carter down carpeted halls, strangely soft to unaccustomed feet. Her nostrils widened like a colt's at the unfamiliar odor of this new atmosphere, a mingling of scented clothing, fine housekeeping, imperceptible to the careful but accustomed nose of Miss Josephine, ever on the alert for forbidden things cigarettes, strong perfumes, bubbling fudge after bedtime. At the ranch, there was only the odor of fresh alfalfa blossoms to cover the smell of frying meat or sizzling frijoles. "This will be your room, dear child." Miss Carter was switching on the lights. Raquel blinked. How pretty. It was prettier than anything at San Anton's big store. Prettier somehow than Raquel's own room at home, and she had thought hers was surely the handsomest set of furniture in the world when Dad bought it for her last year. "You will have a charming roommate, Lois Wainwright, one of our sweetest girls." Miss Carter smiled professionally. You had better dress for dinner now, dear, and then come down to the drawing room as quickly as you can. Left alone, Raquel stood for a moment, smiling, excited. Well, here she was. All these girls to be friends with. And she had to learn to act pretty, like them. Dress for dinner, the teacher had said. Was there anything wrong with her new suit? She had thought it very plain-looking, but that was what they had told her to get. Did Miss Carter mean for her to wear her party dress with elbow sleeves, or should she wear the Sunday dress with long sleeves? She knelt before the bags, and through them open calfskin bags they were, handmade, and polished from a quarter-century's use. The Sunday dress was in the trunk. They had forgotten to unstrap it, and Raquel attacked the clumsy-looking knotted rope with deft fingers. Custer was such a hand at roping, he couldn't even let her new trunk be. Raquel was so absorbed that she did not hear the door softly open and close. I think there must be some mistake. It was an almost artificially sweet voice. I have this room to myself. Perhaps you'd better not unpack until you can be transferred. Lois' eyes took in the cheap trunk, the heavy leather valises. Raquel rose. Surely this was the prettiest girl in the whole world. She could not take her eyes away. I reckon you must be Lois Wainwright, aren't you? Lois Wainwright is my name. Why, then, the brown hand shot out again, you're my roommate sure enough. I'm Raquel Daniels from Lowe's Ranchos. But the pride and confidence in her voice faded as her empty hand fell to her side. It was Jim Hovey, your cousin, who told us about the towers. And you being here and all. And Dad wrote, Jimmy wrote, too, to you. Maybe you didn't get the letter. Raquel stopped, checked by the utter lack of response. I'd have known you anywheres from your picture, she said softly then. Really? How interesting, Lois drawled indifferently. She fancied that her pointless remark was the essence of sarcasm. My father, however, happened to engage my room for me early last summer. Yes, I believe Jimmy did write about you. But I don't pretend to keep up with my cousins or acquaintances. It didn't take schooling for the girl from Lowe's Ranchos to know that she was not wanted. This strange burning in her cheeks and tightness in her throat made it necessary to get away as fast as she could. Stooping quickly, Raquel closed her grips and, striding to the door, threw it open and set the bags, ever so gently this time, outside. Then back, and lifting the heavy trunk on end, she dragged it swiftly and easily to the door and bumped it over the threshold, Lois standing there motionless, like one fascinated by what she had done. It was this tableau which flashed before Anne Marvin as she rounded the corner on her way to her room, and stopped before Lois. Open door Lois standing cool, indifferent, in the center of the room, the new girl flushed, tense, there in the hall in the midst of her own luggage. Anne knew just what had happened. That was clear enough. This is Raquel Daniels, isn't it? She laid a cordial hand on Raquel's arm. I've come up after you to meet my new roommate. There was some mistake in the rooming plans, and we're to be partners, you and I. Shall we go right on to my room? There's just time before dinner. Raquel's head came up proudly. Then she smiled at Anne. Thank you. My mistake. A game youngster, thought Anne. She wouldn't hold up a sore paw. Sporting. And here was a girl you could understand, Raquel felt. Easy-handed enough to gentle a stallion colt. That tight feeling in the chest, the hurt in her throat, eased. And if Anne Marvin winced at Raquel's grip, it did not go unreturned this time. It needed the reassurance of Anne's handclasp to carry Raquel through that first meal at the towers. Such fine linen and silver she had seen in San Antone. And for service, too, the Tall-Tech Hotel during the Cattlemen's Convention could not be surpassed. But to sit in the company of all these easy-mannered girls. Do you find that even your clothing feels damp in the East, Miss Daniels? Is it true that there's only one family to a county in Texas, Miss Daniels? Yes, nom, and yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, were all Raquel could find tongue for. It was not until late the next afternoon that Anne Marvin was called to Miss Carter's office, a formal room of which the girls stood in awe. But Anne never minded being summoned there. Anne usually had her way in life. And this was as true at the Towers as it had been at home. There was a reasonableness and good humor in Anne's way, a deep kindness of heart that argued more eloquently than her words. Tall, blonde, handsome, she was easily the best and the most simply dressed girl at school. Her hair was ashen fair, her skin a flushed ivory, and she wore tans, ashes of roses, sage greens, deep blues, avoiding the usual pinks and blues affected by blondes. Insipid, she said of them. There was nothing insipid about Anne. Sports and studies alike came easily to her far too easily, for, although she was talented, she was lazy. Everything had always come too easily to her family, wealth, position, were hers by inheritance. She might have been a leader among the girls, but leadership did not seem worth exerting herself for. She did what amused or interested her, and read voraciously. She had just finished Cooper's Pathfinder, and that wonderful tale of the Pueblo Indians, the Delight Makers, which had stirred her enthusiasm for the West. Then Raquel arrived, fresh from that land of adventure, a character out of a book. Anne's example did have a great deal of influence at school. She was copied and sought after. But she had not the slightest inclination to manage, and down in her heart she realized that her inertia was often not only lazy but selfish. Don't make me a chairman. Don't ask me to go to her party. Anne, sprawled with a book, would wave an eager girl away and offer a mollifying box of candy. Eat this, please, darling, or I'll be sick. Or, I'll be skiing when that committee meets. Anne would not compose the thesis on history that would have added to her own credits, but she did tutor Lily Matthews so that Lily could finish 2 years of French in one. Needless to say, Anne was amiable up to a certain point. She was furious with Lois now. But she, too, was sporting. It isn't that Lois said anything to her, Miss Carter. She smiled across the desk at Miss Hetty. But one can see that Lois and Miss Daniels are not particularly suited to each other. I find her extremely interesting, and she seems not to object to me. So we just paired off. Miss Hetty smiled dryly. Anne seemed to have taken an unusual amount of trouble. Of course, I haven't yet abandoned my custom of making such arrangements myself, Anne. When I do, I may consult the girls beforehand. Anne, reddening at the rebuke, still smiled disarmingly. I thought, before she got settled, Miss Hetty, very well, Anne, if you wish it. But I thought you particularly wanted to be alone this winter, so that you could give more time to extra subjects. I will, Miss Hetty, I will. In fact, I'll be the gainer, for Miss Daniels can coach me in Spanish. She speaks it like a native. And I will help her in some of her work. And so Raquel stayed in Anne's room, which was plenty large enough for the extra furniture which had to be brought in. It was both gay and comfortable with its English chintzes, even if it was not as exquisite as that other room had been. But it suited Raquel better. Anne could not have imagined her in Lois, setting of taffetas and filet laces. As far as Raquel knew, nothing had been said of what happened the night of her coming to the Towers. It did not occur to her that the story had flashed over the whole school, and that it was discussed by both younger girls and seniors that night, and for a week afterward. Just what had happened, no one knew. But why had Lois snubbed her? Raquel asked herself. She wasn't good enough for her, that was it. After that first night, the girls left her alone, except for the perfunctory courtesies of the table. The novelty of the newcomer wore away in a week. "It's a curious thing," observed Miss Hetty to her younger sister, "how all the girls make excuses for Lois Wainwright. She's a spoiled and sometimes a cold-blooded little thing. I know perfectly well that she said or did something to hurt that Daniels girl. But not one of them would admit it. Lois has everyone waiting on her and shielding her. But someday she'll have to face life on her own. She'll have her first lesson to learn, and this girl from the West may be the one to do it. Even Miss Hetty was sometimes ungrammatical. But she has sweetness and charm." Miss Issa rushed to Lois' defense. "When she wants to be sweet and charming," Miss Hetty put in grimly. "She has you wound round her finger, too, Issaphine." "She's generous to a fault," Miss Issa defended stoutly, "always making gifts and giving her own things away. Yes, it gratifies her and doesn't cost her anything. And that, and her beauty, are what bind the other girls to her." "And there is a something," Miss Hetty mused. "I don't myself know what it is." Her mother had it, and she was a lovable, selfish creature herself. Well, if it weren't for Lois, having lost her mother, and for her father's invalidism, I really wouldn't have her here another winter. She's too capricious, and her extravagance sets a bad example. Her father denies her nothing. She spent more than $150 on that theater party, which we allowed her to take into town last week, and you know I don't approve of 15-year-old girls doing such things. What shall we do about Raquel Daniels?" Miss Issaphine hastily changed the subject. "Her clothes are not adequate. She hasn't at all the wardrobe we advise, and I took special pains to describe everything in our correspondence with her father. And her hair, Hetty, that awful, masculine short hair. It makes her look so boyish." "Hetty, Miss Hetty interrupted her sister with a withering glance. "What shall we do about her clothes?" "Nothing, absolutely nothing. Don't you suppose the child thought they were adequate? Can't you see the stuff she's made of? Can't you see she would suffer if we suggested she discard the clothes she's brought? Wait until she finds out for herself what she wants to wear." "Use a little common sense, Issa," snapped Miss Hetty. "Besides, Anne Marvin has exceptional taste. She'll learn." And Raquel, off in the wing room, was too absorbed in Anne's company to give a thought to clothes. She was telling Anne all about Lowe's ranchos, and Dad and Mother, and the boys Grant and Custer and Georgie. He was 12. And Jim Hovey, who was from Boston. It helped the home hunger a lot to talk about it to willing ears. It was the only world Raquel knew, and under the spell of Anne's sympathy she spread its sunny beauty, its simplicity, its vast unfenced reaches before her new friend. Dad, he was born under a covered wagon on the way west. His father and mother were the first people who pioneered into that valley of the Pecos. And Dad's mother was a beauty in the South, though his father was pioneer stock from way back. Dad, got an idea he wants me to have schooling. He's sold more than 70,000 head of cattle in the last 4 years, and he said, he and Mom, that this was the time for me to go to school. He aimed to have me learn banking and bookkeeping, because he and the boys have to carry every penny in their heads. And they thought I'd worn breeches and ridden the range long enough. They wanted me to go to San Antone at first, But Jimmy, that's Jimmy Hovey, he persuaded I should come to the towers. Raquel stopped a moment, flushing, then went on steadily. Jimmy, he's Lois Wainwright's cousin. He said she was here and would be sweet to me. He thinks a lot of Lois and of her dad. She was like a sister to him, he said, and he used to tease her a lot, but she needed it, though she was a good kid, he said. He had a picture of her on his bureau all the time. She was 12. He hadn't seen her since. She looked just as she does now. I sure liked to look at that picture. And Custer, he just loved it. He thought she was just like a fairy. He said, when she grew up, he wanted to marry that little girl. I thought when I came here, perhaps she would come back to the ranch to visit us sometimes. But now, Raquel smiled pityingly at herself for ever having thought of such an impossible thing. She is pretty, Anne conceded warmly. And she can be sweet when she hasn't some contrary notion fixed in her mind. Her mother died when she was a tiny girl, you see, and her father, I think, was so afraid he would die, too he's sick, you know, and leave her alone, that he always gave her everything she wanted. He tried to make up to her for the loss of her mother, and as a result, she didn't know what it was to be crossed. I think she'd have been different if it weren't for that. But tell me, Raquel, how did Jim Hovey happen to be in the West? Lungs. He came out to our ranch and stayed there a long time. Dad and Mother took a fancy to him. We all did. And after Miss Angie left, she was our school teacher for 6 years. Ever since I was 7, he made Dad let him teach us. He was a fine teacher. I loved to hear him tell about history. He helped me prepare for the examination papers I had to write for Miss Carter before she said I could come here. Raquel, do you mean to say that you've never been to regular school before? I think that's wonderful. A warm flush at the praise spread into the roots of Raquel's cropped hair. It embarrassed her, and she turned her face away. But she was glad to have Anne say it, for she felt a passionate loyalty to this new friend, her first girlfriend. Well, you're the only girl here that does. Raquel grinned bashfully. Oh, I know, I can see. I guess I don't eat right or something, the way the girls at our table look at me sometimes. I suppose they'd be ashamed to ask me to their homes. Oh, Raquel, you mustn't say that. The girls haven't had a chance really to know you yet. And they're more or less taken up with the friendships they made last year, and getting settled, and their studies fixed up and all that. Wait until you've been at the towers a few months, dear, and you'll love it. Oh, I'm glad I came anyways anyway. I mean, although I guess the proper place for me would have been the State Agricultural College. But I've met you, and I'll never forget that. And Dad wants me to have some life away from the ranch, he says. Mom does too. But she's different from Dad. She doesn't talk much. She says she was so much alone in the early days, with the mesa and the desert stretchin', out so silent all round, that she guesses she forgot how to talk. Most ranch women are like that. And then when Dad came in, he would do all the talkin'. Mom says she wants me to have a plenty of pretty things to think about when I go back home. Ranch women are bound to be alone more or less. But I think it's mighty pretty to raise the colts and gentle them. That's my job at home. I'm more like Dad, I guess. I like to ride the range. And I haven't forgotten how to talk. Both girls laughed spontaneously. But Dad seems to set a lot of store by his mother's memory. Says he'd like for me to have some of the things she gave up when she and my granddad went west. And he wants me to be able to hold my own out in the world as well as on the range, he says. And I've got to do it. Raquel, do you look like this grandmother? Dad thinks so, because he wants to, but no one else seems to. Not even me, and I'd like to myself. Do you want to see her picture? At Anne's eager nod, Raquel laid before her roommate a tintype from which looked out a vivid, dark face. The finely cut features, the way the head was set upon the slender throat, made you think of pride, and metal, the endurance of a blooded horse. She smiled out at you in the strangely lifelike way that tinted tintypes have. "She is beautiful, Raquel," said Anne at last, "and you are very like her, except for the curls and in the coquetry. I never realized before just how lovely you are." Anne's blue eyes looked up in frank and generous admiration at the finely featured brown face bending over her, the sleek, closely cropped brown head, which clever Anne saw had sheiken a day before the boyish bob was smart. She was growing tremendously fond of Raquel. Too covered with embarrassed shyness to speak, Raquel brought out from the calfskin valise some snapshots of herself and the boys. "Jimmy took these. There's Dad. Isn't he sweet?" Pointing at a tall, lean, bow-legged figure in the middle of the group, horny-handed, weather-beaten. "And Custer, he's awfully handsome. Mom is right pretty, but she won't ever stand up for a picture. She had one when she was married," she said, "and she's never had time to be dressed up since." "Why, Reiki Daniels," chanted Anne. "Is this you in the beauteous leather breeches with the silver belt and all those silver buttons? And look at the hat. Aren't you wonderful? Did you bring them with you?" Raquel grinned sheepishly. "Took up the whole bottom of my trunk, and I guess I won't get to wear 'em anyway. Let me see 'em, quick." "Oh, I want to wear." Someone was knocking insistently at the door, and Anne, springing up belatedly to answer, was drawn mysteriously into the hall. "I really can't," Raquel could hear the answer. "No, well, I'm sorry, Lois, but if you can't, I can't." "Do you mean to say," came in audible exasperation from the other side of the door, "that you won't go anywhere without—" The door was quickly and decisively closed. Anne came back in a few moments with an elaborate air of unconcern, but the magic spell was broken. Raquel had relapsed into the subdued, colorless, and somewhat stiff young person who took her seat each day at the table with the throng of careless, happy, moody, flippant, serious, generous, and thoughtless girls at the Towers. Autumn flew by. The red haze of autumnal sunsets deepened, and each night the red haze of war, the Great War, spread further over the country, until at last it colored even the atmosphere of the schools, including that of the Towers School for Girls. "Bari has enlisted with the French Flying Corps," Anne announced one afternoon as Raquel came in to find her tearful but proud, a letter from home in her hand. To youth, there was thrilling excitement in the great adventure. It did not loom with the deadly portent which weighted the spirits of their elders. Somehow it could not touch them with its lean and cruel finger, or had not, as yet. There was a rush of gaieties, a feverish busyness, those days. Innumerable parties planned to cheer the boys, to keep up their morale. Even the schoolgirl was called upon to do her bit. The girls at the Towers were to take charge of the booths at a Red Cross benefit fair to be held in the nearby village. Nearly all the older girls had been invited to a party, and a dance to be given afterward for the lads about to sail for France. Raquel had never yet been included in those little gaieties given surreptitiously in one girl's room or another's. She never seemed to be gathered into those little chatting bevies that foregather in a corner. And so far, she had not been asked to take any part in preparations for the fair. The older girls had been organized into committees of arrangements. Would they have her sell something? Raquel wondered. Shyness, partly, and partly the consciousness of that first snub, had held her aloof ever since her coming to the Towers. Raquel was not in the least self-conscious, but instinctively she drew herself into a shell of silence, and like the plants of her own desert, thrust out little thorny spikes that said, "Keep off," just as effectively as if the words had been visible. And she found little time for play in this new and ordered existence. The rising bell, the quick shower, adopted after observing Anne's habits for a week. Prayers, breakfasts they always left her hungry, for they were daintier, but not half so satisfying as breakfasts at Lowe's Ranchos, and then classes and study periods in quick succession. Raquel worked hard and stood well in her studies at the end of the first half term, in spite of the fact that she could hardly understand the marked English accent of one of her teachers. She probably could not have understood her at all, had it not been for her experience with Jimmy Hovey's crisp Boston elegance of diction. She began to feel less constraint with the girls, too. But she and Lois Wainwright had never spoken to each other since that first evening. Lois, whose serene face betrayed nothing of what might be passing within her head, gave no sign of any secret compunctions. Once she stopped in the hall beside Raquel, however, as if to speak to her. But Raquel remained quietly studying the bulletin board, and after a moment Lois shrugged her shoulders and went on. Raquel knew that Lois was standing there, but she was afraid of another snub and had made up her mind not to put herself in the way of it. Raquel did not know how to forgive gracefully. In her country, it was etiquette not to forgive an insult. She had been brought up on tales of men's vengeance, of killings for insults. Dad had always said a man could steal him blind, but insult him never. Once when a group of girls from the towers were riding, Raquel and Marian, a plump, highly manicured girl of 16 who was always in Lois' wake, with several of the younger girls galloped ahead of the party. Raquel, who was well in the lead, became separated from the others as she mistook the road, turning off in another direction. When finally she overtook her party, pulling up after a furious gallop, she was escorted by two nice-looking boys who reined in their mounts beside the girls. Marian recognized the boys as coming from a preparatory school about 2 miles from the towers. Smiling her prettiest and edging her horse closer to Raquel's, she waited for an introduction to the attractive strangers. Raquel, untrained in such amenities and coquetries, was chatting easily and brightly with her appreciative companions. "Thank you so much for setting me on my way. I sure was lost. That was a nice race we had, and I'll be glad to beat you again any other day. These are my friends from the towers." She waved a comprehensive hand at the other girls. "But don't let us make you any later." Marian was glaring at her, the other girls noticing her curiously, as if for the first time. How attractive Raquel was in her riding clothes. Why, she looked stunning. As the boys lifted their caps with a flourish and cantered away, Marian turned on Raquel. "Well, what was the object in not introducing those boys?" "Why, stammered Raquel. "I don't know their names." "Oh," interrupted Marian scornfully. "So you picked them up. I suppose they do that sort of thing where you come from." Her sarcasm flew wide of the mark because it was a simple truth. "We don't see any harm in thanking a stranger who is polite to us, and we let alone those who ain't." Raquel, furious, gathered her reins, and under a mysterious pressure of her knees, the horse sprang into a full run, and they were off and down the road in a clatter of shod hoofs before Marian could think of an answer. "Gee," said Nancy, one of the Jarrod twins, "she surely got off on the right foot." "The riding master can't even do that, throw his mount into a run from a standstill." "Thought you said, Marian, that cowgirl couldn't ride a real horse." "Got off on the right word, too, if you ask me," giggled Gloria, the other twin. Who said she was dumb? Helen Virginia Jones, a plump Southern girl of 15, made no comment, for she was busy thinking to herself that she would cajole her mother into getting her a new riding suit of that tan deerskin cloth, with the faintest twill, and have the breeches fitting snugly at the knees just as that Daniels girl's did. Why, it was actually the smartest thing at the Towers. Raquel might have felt happier had she heard her champions. And her habit was beautiful. She had chosen the cloth because it did look like deerskin, and Anne's tailor had done the rest. But her pleasure in the new outfit was spoiled, and all the way back she felt miserably guilty and uncomfortable at the rebuke. The day for the fair drew near. Everyone except little Emmy Martin and the 11-year-old Gerards was planning a booth. But no one had yet said anything to Raquel about helping. Still, she really thought they would ask her. She would not have inquired about it for anything. Girls were strange, after all, Raquel felt. If it had been a bunch of men or boys, now well, you could step right up and ask, straight out. Anne, as usual, had shunted aside any committee work, with the easy assurance of plunging in at the last moment and doing whatever she could, whatever remained to be done, to help. They like it, she argued comfortably. It's good for them. I don't like it. And there's always a lot to be done at the last. They always need someone to step in at the last minute. So she gave the fair little thought and didn't realize that Raquel was being left out. 2 days beforehand, Raquel, dressing back of a curtain in the gym, heard her name. Raquel Daniels. Dress her up and take her along. I like that girl and she surely can ride. No, impatiently, in Marian's voice. She's such a stick. She couldn't wear the clothes if she had 'em. No, can't be bothered. She wouldn't know how to act, and the fellows simply wouldn't have a good time with an unattractive girl. Cowgirl. What does she know of romance or managing things? Oh, I think you ought to ask her. It was Helen Virginia's voice, amiable and drawly. She's not even been given a booth at the fair. Why not put her at the fudge booth? She can surely sell candy. Raquel Daniels couldn't sell Red Cross stamps. Besides, Lois is the chairman and she's got it all arranged. Raquel will have to help her country some other way. And there was a laugh. Raquel had wanted to speak to, let them know at once that she was there. But instinctive kindness kept her from presenting herself, to the embarrassment of the speakers, when unkind things had been said about her. But the last words these girls sure used a mean quirt. Tears stung Raquel's eyes. She could not have uttered a word. Then rage boiled up to her rescue. So they wouldn't even let her sell fudge. A little old candy. Why, all they could make and sell wouldn't bring as much as one good steer. Well, there were other ways of helping one's country. Perhaps she didn't know how to dress or act. Why should she? But she could go back and ride the range, and raise stock to feed the armies. Beef'd carry 'em a lot further than fudge. At the comforting thought, Raquel was able to smile. In her pocket was a letter from Dad. Custer had enlisted one day, and Grant the next. They were already in training camp. And good old Jimmy, who couldn't make it for overseas service, was teaching at one of the new training camps. But all right, little girl, wrote Dad. We don't need you, at least not yet. You just stay on and get all the learnin' and fun you can. I'll let you know when I need you. Dad had always said she was as good as a couple of hands. She burned to show him what she could do now. After all, Raquel did not have to endure the fair where she could not help. Coming into her room the next afternoon, dispirited, feeling, she thought to herself, like a prickly pear, she was met by Anne waving a letter from her mother. You're coming home with me for Thanksgiving. Yes, you are. Here's a letter from Mother saying so. I didn't know whether she'd have room or not, and as she always makes room if one of us asks to bring someone home, I waited. Come on, Reiki, let's go tonight. It was a homecoming that Raquel never forgot. Anne's father, eyes twinkling, voice booming out. Well, here's our little Texan. Anne's mother, clasping Raquel close, mothering her, so that she felt at once enveloped in affection and understanding. She marveled at the personal daintiness of Anne's mother, the faintly scented lace in her bosom, so different from Raquel's own best violet soap at 10 cents a cake. Why, Anne's mother had gray hair, yet she was dressed up as pretty and sweet, and her hair was done as nicely as a young girl. The great house with its crystal lights, its damask walls, its bowls of flowers, was to remain always in Raquel's mind as an incredible vision, somehow too beautiful for daily use. If school had seemed luxurious, it now paled into simplicity beside the finished elegance of the Marvin house, where living was made a fine art. There was breakfast in bed the next morning on a tray that looked like a bed of Mom's posies, sure enough. There was a maid to draw her bath, and slip her feet into red leather shoes, and throw a velvety red robe around her shoulders. A guest gift from Mrs. Marvin, miss, she explained. Raquel didn't see Anne until 10 o'clock, when she came trailing in great good spirits. Shopping, you and me, Reiki. Come on, the car'll be here in 10 minutes. There were shops and things such as Raquel had never dreamed of. And Anne looking at all sorts of clothes. That pink and flame Georgetto. Raquel had never really wanted clothes like this before. The money Dad had given her she had spent but a little of it yet, for her riding habit. This was the time to do it. She would get some new clothes to wear at Anne's house. This novel idea was no sooner imparted to Anne than saleswomen came hurrying, and racks and chairs bloomed. Try them on, but of course. Mademoiselle had an excellent straight back. But she must not be stiff. But there, that was better, relax, so. It was a different Raquel who emerged from that shop an hour later, in a simple suit of golden tan tweed, a jaunty hat of dark brown velour, and a Scotch heather top coat. And it was a vision in pale pink and flame color, satin-shod, that descended the staircase in the Marvin home the next evening, Thanksgiving night. At the footbari Marvin, home for the holidays, fine and handsome in his uniform, waited to take her in to dinner. Oh, God, prayed Raquel earnestly. I can ride a bucking bronco, I can rope and tie a Latin verb, but, oh, God, please, don't let me slip on the floors and disgrace myself before Anne's family. What a pity the girls at school couldn't see Raquel now, thought Anne. If Lois could, she would either turn a little bit green or else come around generously, in the way her friends adored, and admit Raquel the equal of any girl at school, even if she couldn't see her superiority when it wasn't dressed up. But Lois was not to see Raquel in the chiffon gown. The flowering was but for a night. And there, too, fate was to take a hand. For Barry Marvin carried away with him, when he sailed for France that week, the memory of a vivid dark face, lit from within with candles of happiness that seemed to warm to life an unexpected humor. Or was it just the surprise of such penetrating honesty, such simple candor? Barry, the charmer, the gay and reckless Barry who was never hard hit by any girl. But this was different. A little girl, he said to himself, just a little Texas girl. But what a find. A memory for any chap to tie to. Anne, crouching on Raquel's bed late that night, talked and talked, laughing, romancing, going off in gay flights of imagination which literal-minded Raquel could scarcely follow. La Principessa Raquela, with the spell cast off. She was a bewitched princess shut up in the towers. You're more like it. I always pictured you, Raquel's thought came hesitatingly. When we read that poem, The Princess. I never did see anyone look more beautiful than you did tonight, Anne. You sure did look lovely in that changeable taffeta, blue and silvery. And your hair, braided round your head, shines so. I was just thinkin' how the boys, Grant and Custer, and Russell and Jommy there, our ropers I told you about, would sit up and stare if they could see you. Oh, Anne, you must come out to Lowe's Ranch someday. We'd sure treat you like a princess. Me, I'm just a desert plant, made to stand a hard life and bloom once in 15 years. Tomorrow I'll be the same old ugly Reiki again. There was a long yellow envelope awaiting Raquel when she and Anne set down their bags 3 mornings later in the great hall at the towers. A night message from Dad. Enlisted today. Assigned to Animal Transport Section. It ran. Need you back to run the ranch. He was to leave as soon as she could get home. Dad enlisted. And she was to be the boss of the Lazy L. Curiously enough, Miss Hetty Carter was at almost the same moment reading a message from Mr. Wainwright. Lois was not to return to school, he was sorry to say. The doctors had ordered him west. He had little time to live, though Lois did not know it. And he felt that he could not bear to be parted from her, so she was going with him. When the girls were assembled in the auditorium, Miss Hetty Carter stepped before them to make an announcement. Something in her manner commanded a deeper hush than usual. I have 2 announcements to make which I know you will all be sorry to hear. The news of Lois' departure was received with whispered ahs of surprise and disappointment, which rose from all over the assembly room. Miss Carter waited a moment and then spoke quietly. We have had with us this year another classmate, whom some of you have not come to know very well, Raquel Daniels. Raquel is in her room now, packing to leave us. She has been called home to run the ranch, while her father and brothers are at war. It is a big thing to do, an important one. And it falls upon the shoulders of a girl of barely 16 years. I should be happy if you would offer Raquel some evidence of your good wishes and appreciation of what she is doing for her country. It was always bewildering to Raquel, the recollection of that leave-taking at the towers. Deep in the old trunk, with Anne sorting her traveling clothes, she rose at a knock to see the whole school, apparently, trying to crowd into her room. Girl after girl, they squeezed in, and then bright little Lily Matthews was speaking for them. They'd heard she was going. They were also so sorry. But wasn't it splendid? And the Towers was so proud of her, anyone who could be really useful. And here was a token of their esteem. An earnest little Lily, eyes suddenly brimming, planted a kiss on Raquel's cheek. And then a shower of books, scarves, boxes of candy, girls, trinkets, came pouring into Raquel's lap and trunk, and Raquel was standing up before them all. I'm glad you came, thank you. And for the presents. I don't deserve any, but I'm sure glad not to quit an outlaw to part friends. That same afternoon, 2 westbound trains sped into the setting sun, bearing 2 girls, one back to the country she knew and understood, the other away from all the scenes that knew and understood her, into a strange country where life might deal none too gently. Chapter 2, Home Again. Down at the end of the corral in the hot sunshine of midday, Panchito Esquibel was energetically currying his burro. It is necessary, for the padroncita comes. But thou art going to be most beautiful, my little one, therefore do not budge. He spoke reassuringly, judging no doubt that the burro had the same objections as he had himself to submitting to such an operation. Rest tranquil, advised Pancho the elder, who watched his son from the shadow of the corral sheds, a lazy cigarette drooping from his lips. He will not run. It would take more than currying. Hey, you Pancho Esquibel, yelled a voice from inside the shed. I wish I knew what would make you run or work once. Not a penny do you get this month, till you get these here saddles everyone worked over. Here. Supple up them, cinch straps on Raquel's saddle. They'll be here any minute now. Russell, if he had another name, no one knew it was polishing. As he spoke, the silver fittings on a beautiful saddle of Spanish leather, with an energy that made his red face even more fiery. Russell certainly ain't purty, mister. Daniels had often said of the gangling cowboy, but he's as faithful as that ol' hound dog and a dern good hand. At the bunkhouse, an extraordinary activity was going on, currying of heads and grooming of beds. Chuck them dirty shirts under your bunk, Angel, shouted Jommy Jameson. Do you want the boss to see M? Jommy had washed and washed on the bunkhouse veranda until even his fingernails were clean. He was now struggling into new boots, which fitted so tightly over the instep that the operation was excruciating. But the boots were the finishing touch to a superb costume cowhide chaps, buff corduroy shirt, beaver hat limbered up to a picturesque limpness, and a blue and orange silk neckerchief, the loose elegance of the whole artfully filling out 6'2" of incredibly thin cowboy. "'Pears to me," observed Ol' Hossfoot Cantner, who, having oiled his hair, now sat on the edge of a bunk oiling a gun. "You're talkin' a awful lot o' trouble fur just seein' Raquel again." He squinted down the barrel of the gun, a pretty little .22 that he himself had given Raquel 2 years ago. "Brrrr," snarled Jommy. "I see you shaved your chin first time in 20 years, 'stead of mowin' it off with a pair o' sheep shears." And having at last worked into the boots, for which he had spent the whole of his past 2 months' salary, namely $40, Jommy examined his own chin for any fugitive blonde down that might not have been revealed the first time. He scorned notice of Hossfoot's new red flannel shirt and his best corduroy breeches. Up at the ranch house, there was an air de fiesta, as Mariquita Esquibel confided to her little sister. Mrs. Daniels, a green apron over her fresh gingham, knelt before the open oven turning a pan of light bread. On the long kitchen table, 12 big golden brown loaves cooled, giving off a delicious odor. They never baked less than 24 loaves at a time at Lowe's Ranchos, and they baked every other day. The verandas had been swept and scoured with lava sand and buckets of hot water, the kitchen floor freshly oiled. A clean red cloth covered the kitchen table. There were 3 smaller rooms opening from the kitchen, pantries and storerooms, and in the middle one of these there lay on a massive table a full haunch of venison, which Ol' Hossfoot had brought down with him from the mountains the day before. Beside it were spread some 3 dozen plump little birds, all skinned, ready for the frying pan-late quail that Russell had shot at daybreak that morning. Mrs. Daniels rose and passed through the 3 rooms to an outer one, where, over a spring bubbling from the virgin rock floor, the milk shelves were hung. Lifting down one of the blue pans, she unrolled from the top of the milk a little blanket of cream 1/2 an inch thick, popped it into a glass churn standing near, and returned to the kitchen with the clabber. "Think I'll make a mess of gingerbread," she explained to the resplendent Jommy, who lounged into the kitchen just then. Raquel always did like it. "Expect I have time before they get here." She smiled a crinkly-eyed, patient little smile. "Them prune pies aren't going to last very long, Mrs." Daniels was a short, plump woman, small-boned. Her cheeks were round and rosy under the brown skin, thin and smooth like a baby's, except around the eyes where tiny wrinkles protested against the desert glare. She stooped to take out the second pan of bread, and the smell of roasting venison escaped as the oven door was opened. The mingling of meat odors and fresh bread brought the hound dogs sniffing at the kitchen screens. On the back of the stove, the inevitable frigid beans simmered. "A fiesta," said 13-year-old Mariquita, who sat in a corner peeling a mound of potatoes. Beside her on the floor sat her little sister, in her lap a bowl of scarlet chili which she was crushing with bare hands. "Gimme that chili, Josefita. You'll burn your little hands with that old hot stuff, Mrs." Daniels' voice had the caressing drawl of the Oklahoma-born. She took the dish from the little girl and gave her a sack of tiny piñon nuts to crack instead. "They're coming. They're coming," shouted Jami from the front veranda, and yells of announcement were heard from corral and bunkhouse. "Mrs." Daniels hurried out to the piazza where Jami, his eyes glued to a pair of field glasses, was looking towards the pass-through which ran the road to town. "They're only 6 miles away." "Just hit the pass," he yelled. "Guess I'll ride out to meet 'em at the pasture gate," and he threw down the glass and bolted for his horse. But Russell was ahead of him and already clattering out of the corral. As the big Pathfinder struck the top of the Organ Pass and began to coast down the mountain slope, a full view of the Daniels ranch spread before the returning party. Beneath them the road fell away, and with the roar of the Pathfinder's engines shut off, they seemed to float down through the clear air. Below lay the ranch, resting on the eastern slope of one of those sharp, sheer spurs of the southernmost Rockies. Away, almost as far as you could see, stretched mile after square mile, the fenced acres of the ranch of the Lazy L. In those days, Lowe's ranchos boasted 35 square miles, besides 10,000 acres of rented range, a feudal domain, larger by far than that ruled over by many a baron or prince of old. In that land, Dad Daniels' word was law, though there were few men to heed it, and the wild creatures that warred against cattle and cattlemen had a law of their own. For 35 miles to the north or east you might travel, and neither see smoke in a chimney, nor speak to a man. For there would be neither chimney nor man, and for 20 miles to the south only the cowboy or an overland car. But westward, it was just 8 miles to the little mining town over the pass. From there, it was 15 miles to the nearest railroad station, bank, and ice cream fountain. "Well, there's home, Raquel." Old man Daniels leaned forward from the back seat, where he sat with Georgie, whose round face belied the man's estate claimed by a pistol holster on the hip. "That's yourn from now on for a spell, by right of eminent domain." As the scent of the mesa blew fresh in her face, and the familiar sight of the ranch house and its outlying buildings, their cream-plastered walls vivid in the late afternoon sun, came nearer and nearer, Raquel drew a sigh of content. Her eyes sparkled as she called over her shoulder, "I pretty nearly forgot what the sun looked like back there." "What?" Jimmy Hovey, back on a 3 days' leave, beamed from the driver's seat beside her. "What? Didn't the sun go with you then?" "Why, it's been much darker since you went away." "This is a special illumination in your honor." "Aw, cut it out, Jimmy," growled Georgie. "Raquel's gone to have an awful swelled head anyways." "Say, sis, thought you were goin' to be wearin' some real purty clothes, velvet or silk or somethin'." He looked with disdain at her homespun. That coat looks just like Jimmy S. They were nearing the upper pasture, where the radiant Jami waited, swinging wide the gate to let the pathfinder through. Had it not been for a deep arroyo between the upper and the lower pastures, the car could have coasted straight to the ranch house door, but Jimmy deftly threw in his clutch and started the engine just as they struck heavy sand. Roaring boastfully of its 80 horsepower, the car slid through the outer gate and rolled quietly to a stop before the patio door. Howdy, howdy, Raquel. There was the canny Russell, redder than ever, who had ridden back through a short cut so that he might be the first to shake Raquel's hand, which he was now awkwardly pumping up and down. And Ol Hosfoot. And if there was an Angel, and Pancho Esquibel, extending the most ceremonious and courtly greeting of them all to his my querida padroncita. "Where's Mom?" Raquel's eyes looked eagerly ahead through the open patio door, across the courtyard and into the house. "Oh, that poor old mother woman, Mr. Daniels answered. "Most likely she's hidden, out like she always does when anyone comes home. 'Fraid she'll cry. Guess I'll have to go and drag her out of the ice house." And in fact they did. Even when Dad and Raquel appeared in the ice house door, their eyes searching the dark recesses, Mom was so busy with imaginary duties that she could not hear them. "Mother, you in there?" they called. "Yes'm," she answered desperately. "You back, Raquel? Did you have a good time?" "Sure has been a dry winter here." Raquel threw her arms around her mother's neck and kissed her cheeks and misses. Daniels pulled her apron over her head and wept. Later, as they walked together towards the ranch living room, Mrs. Daniels said, "That's sure a purty suit and coat you brought back, Raquel honey. Did you get you a red dress while you were away?" That having been the fondest fancy of Raquel's childhood. "Yes'm." Raquel remembered the pink and flame-colored chiffon, an ethereal realization of that red dress of her early dreams, and as different from it as that other world, which it brought back for a moment so far away that already it seemed like a dream. The thought of her school life had been with her constantly on the train, but now it slipped from her mind completely as her father called her out to the veranda to point out how dry the grass was over the mesa at their feet. The sun was setting in a splendor of unbroken crimson that faded through the spectrum into the dark blue of the overhead sky. In the east, another spur of mountains glowed, like living opals with reflected color. Across the great mesa, rolling away from their door, stretched an unbroken vista of 35 miles. "I'd hoped to ride the range with ye tomorrow, Raquel," said Mr. Daniels, "but I'm due to sail any minute. Everything's in good shape, but feed's scarce. And looks like there'll be little seed for spring. Mr. Daniels spoke wistfully. "Seems I'm due along to catch some vessels goin' straight over, transportin' cattle. It's time to bring down that bunch of cattle up T, the Ruidoso. They's 500-600 up there. They should bring a fancy price on all that good grass, $75 a head. I cleaned up this fall, sold 20,000 head for feeders from $45 to $50 on the hoof, which cleared up every cent we owed on bank stock, and that herd of thoroughbreds I bought last year. Not more'n 5,000 left now. Where's all the boys?" asked Raquel. "Oh, I had to let 'em go when Custer and Grant enlisted. They was leavin' of 'em down in the bunk house. Guess you seen make out with Russell and Jami. Poor Russ had flat feet, bad eyes, boils, and what not, which don't seem to interfere none with his bane, as good a roper as ever forked saddle leather. And Jami, well, even a high instep and a good fittin'. Boot didn't get him past. Underweight, they says, even with shot sewed in his pockets, and him the fightingest young catamount and the toughest in these here parts. Pancho Esquibel, he's on the commissary same as usual. Hasn't no use for legal shootin', Pancho hasn't, and the draft ain't drawed him yet. Watch that thievin' coyote, but I never found his beat for Brandon, saddle work, and the like. And ol' Hossfoot stands ready on call to look after my gal. But I guess you don't need much lookin' after Reiki. You'll about do all the lookin' after yourself. Girls' brains are as good as man's brains any time, and you been brung up on the runnin' of the rancho. They's nothin' new to you in the cattle business. Dad looked fondly and sentimentally at Raquel. Stern overlord, shrewd cattleman and financier, old man Daniels was tender if strict with his family, and proud, particularly of his only daughter. I'm not tellin' ye to be a man, Reiki. I don't want for ye to be. We got men enough in the family. And Georgie here is the man of the place to look after the women folks. He's been as good as two hands since Grant and Custer left. It was true that Raquel knew each trick of grazing, branding, the business of the roundup, the horses. She had been keeping books for her father after a crude way of her own before she left for school, and the 3 months training in accounting she had taken would make it infinitely easier now. She knew the packing houses and commission merchants with whom her father dealt. She followed the market quotations on beef, which he read laboriously from the Sunday paper every week, as a matter of course as other girls follow hat sales. She knew the business of shipping, from the drive down to the railroad yards to the telegram announcing the shipment of the cattle. But this would be an unusually hard year. Before Raquel lay the problem of looking after the herd that remained, with 4 boys instead of the 12 or 14 they usually had in the summer, bringing the leaner cattle or the weaklings down to the corrals to be fed up, riding the range to keep an eye on the new calves in the spring, especially if it should be a cold or late season. And then, after the rodeo and branding, the job of selling, feeding the cattle before shipping, and delivering safely to the yards. But that was all work which a good overseer could handle. Today, Dad's business had grown to such proportions that the financial end of it was half the work. The main thing you'll have to handle, Raquel, Dad said, looking keenly at her, is meetin' our notes. $30,000 on the Valley Grant land, due April 1st, and the interest on our other 2 loans. That means you'll ship at least 1,000 head of cattle early in March. I wouldn't have expanded so much, talkin' in extra range, if I'd realized I'd have to be leavin' it all to you like this. Bane, as we're borrowed up to the hilt, if anything should come up unexpected, we'd have to turn over our cattle quick. The banks have all loaned the limit to the stockmen this fall, and although I stood to make a fortune, I'm afeard there's trouble ahead for the stockmen. A.B. Mayers has been made director in our bank to succeed me. You know he swore to get me for callin', that note of his 2 years ago. Dad chewed his long mustache. As a matter of fact, if he hadn't been forced to draw in and sell some o' his stock, he'd be broke and most likely rustlin' cattle to start a new herd today. But that don't make him feel no better, knowin' that. And he may cause some trouble. So remember you got to have $35,000 by April 1st. You'd better ship the first week in March. Don't worry, Dad. Leave it to me, we'll ship 'em. I've got 'em off before. I can do it again, A.B. Mayers, known in that part of the country as A. B., himself an old-timer, figured with Old Man Daniels as one of the biggest cattlemen in that part of Texas. He had disputed the open range with Dad for 20 years, and the enmities of the cattle country were still bitter at the time of the Great War. B's range touched Lowe's Rancho's land at 2 points. And A.B. fought secretly and openly for every piece of property that Daniels would be likely to want. It had been nip and tuck, with Dad getting the best of it 2/3 of the time. 2 years before, the Valley Grant, a rich range that mayors had been after for 5 years, had been granted by the land office to Old Man Daniels. Neither his popularity nor his influence had succeeded in winning him this new range, but the fact that he was a sounder businessman than A. B, and one whose dealings were absolutely square. Dad had then borrowed money from the bank to acquire the intervening land, thus extending his range enormously. He had also bought some new stock, and for 2 years had not sold any cattle in order to increase the stock on the fresh range. Then the war had come, and he had had to begin selling his cattle. But when it comes to sellin', have nothing to do with these travelin' commission men, Dad impressed Raquel for the 50th time. There's bound to be a lot of 'em prowlin' around durin' this war, or I miss my guess. Beware of 'em. You sell straight to Cutilos in Kansas City or shift S in Chicago, and rest content at the market price. Bank everything and go slow. Guess that's all. Jimmy, as Jimmy himself came round the veranda end, Jimmy here, says he'll be able to get off maybe every couple of months, and he'll come out and cheer you all up. On the stillness of the December air, chill with the penetrating cold that steals into your bones with sundown in that altitude, clanged the welcome note of the dinner bell. Not all ranch houses boast a dining room, but Lowe's Ranchos had rooms to spare. The rambling old building, once a fort, later a road house, was high-ceilinged, deep-walled to the width of 3 full adobe bricks, and built around a 50-foot square patio in the fashion of the country. Old Man Daniels led the way through the house to the patio, and along the veranda to the dining room. As he opened the door, a wave of warmth and light streamed out. A large base burner glowed where once had been a fireplace, and this, with the heat from the kitchen and from an acetylene lamp hanging over the table, made the big room comfortable. The feudal board bore up sturdily under the food that Mother Daniels had prepared in honor of Raquel's return, and Dad's last night at home. The juicy haunch of venison was at one end, a platter of golden brown quail at the other, flanked with savory bacon. Huge bowls of flaky potatoes, chili and beans, winter squash, and Mother Daniels' sweet-pickled peaches made a continuous round of the table. The mounds of bread would have appalled a camp baker. And the dishes of gravy seemed like never-failing pitchers of Baucis and Philemon. In a moment they were all seated, taking the fringed napkins from the glasses and piling the plates with unpampered appetite. My goodness, thought Raquel, as Ole Hossfoot speared a piece of bread, deftly reaching across Jimmy's face. Jommy's smooth cheek was bulging, and Georgie's face was bisected with a whole slice of bread and butter. Angel's eyes followed lovingly the bowl of beans, which, never stopping its circuit of the table, was now in Dad's hands. Hair's like someone's missin', mister. Daniels peered down the table, counting 10 heads. Where's Russell? There was a momentary pause in the clatter of fork and knife against plate long enough to hear a pounding on the dining room floor from beneath. He's down in the storm cellar, and Mister. Daniels, pushing back his chair, strode towards an inner wall, stopped, and pulled up a trapdoor in the floor. It was like releasing a jack-in-the-box, for simultaneously Russell's red and agitated face popped up, and he clambered out, bearing a big jug and a little jug. Everyone roared, except Russell and Georgie, who sank down in his seat. I forgot to let him out, he mumbled. Russell had brought his contribution to the feast, some sparkling hard cider, and a peach brandy which he had buried in the earth more than a year before. In spite of the mighty prowess of the diners, scarcely a dent seemed to be made in Mother Daniel's provisions. When the meal was over, Raquel and Georgie rushed to their mother's side, and each seized an arm. "No, you don't, Mom. Come on. The boys will wash dishes tonight." "Well, mind you don't chip 'em any, Angel," Mom cautioned. "And don't rub the gold hard." For Mom had got out the best dishes, with a gold band and a large gold D initialed on each piece. It was an elegant set, all right, and Dad sure liked the looks of that gold. So they went into the sitting room, where Dad was already sitting with his shoes off, warming his feet before the open fire. The ranch sitting room was magnificent by firelight. It was long and fairly wide, with heavy, irregular beams studding its ceiling. Mesquite roots and dried tulas burned in an uncommonly large fireplace, built with a projecting hood by some Mexican craftsman with a cunning hand. The firelight leaped ruddily on the cream-plastered walls and on trophies of ranch hunts hanging there. On the floor were Navajo rugs, black and white, gray and red, and Angora sheep pelts, dyed to inconceivable Mexican hues. The furniture was of various kinds, mostly ugly, except for a set of willow which belonged on the porch, a couch covered with a fine old chimyo rug, blue and white as only those Indians can make them, and a battered old Spanish table, hand-carved, but alas, not valued by anyone but Jimmy Hovey. Raquel sank upon the sofa, and Jimmy seated himself beside her, lighting a cigarette. "Just one, old Jim," warned Raquel. Jimmy grinned. "Bossing me straight off, aren't you?" "But honestly, big boss, I haven't coughed in 6 months. That's because I made you cut it out." Jimmy smiled gently and nodded. Jimmy had a most gentle way. It might deceive you unless you saw him angry. The way he got that time when Pancho Esquibel's brother beat the Alesan mare over the head. Hate. It made her shiver to think of it. But she had liked Jimmy ever since. Now she noticed, for the first time, how good-looking he was. His head was so round, and so straight on his shoulders. And he seemed taller than she remembered him, bigger. "I've gained 20 pounds, since last year." Jimmy's eyes twinkled. "You mustn't tell all you think, Raquel with your eyes." Jimmy's hair was crisp and wavy, rather blonde, and his eyes were extremely blue. He had a cleft in his chin when he smiled, and he smiled often. Yes, Raquel decided, he was the same old Jimmy, and the only reason she hadn't thought about how he looked was that he was just so nice that she had never thought of anything else. And then he was thin and ever so sick when he first came. Jimmy was studying Raquel thoughtfully and appreciatively. He had done little else since her return. By George, what a development in 3 months. First of all, the clothes. Jimmy's city-bred eye could scarcely fail to take them in at once. By George, the right clothes, cloth, cut, color, and all that, certainly did show a pretty girl off to advantage. But the other change, inside, he was studying now. The same Raquel, in most ways her smile, was as warm and unaffected as when she had left. But she didn't talk as much as one would expect of Raquel on getting back from school. And she seemed to avoid him somehow, in little strange evasions. "Tell me a bit about it, Raquel," he begged, "about school. How did it go off? I had only one letter from you, and that was largely taken up describing the difference in the training of the Eastern girls' high school horse and our Western horses." "Oh, Jimmy, I did too write you another letter." "Yes, that one was all about how much further advanced we were in our medieval history." But not a word of yourself. Jimmy knocked out his cigarette. What of my little cousin? Raquel knew no arts. 3 months before she would have said, well, she and I kept to opposite sides of the corral. But 3 months had tempered her frankness with consideration. 3 months of association with Anne had added ease to her forthright manners. Lois is even more beautiful than when you saw her, Jimmy, she answered, and she is so popular. All the girls in the school were crazy about her. She would be, Jimmy nodded as a matter of course. A sharp pang of something or other set Raquel's blood racing. I haven't heard from Uncle in some time. I wonder how they are. Raquel started to speak. Anne had told her on the way to the train that Lois was gone, and why. But as she hesitated, Jimmy pressed, did she make a good roommate? That's what I want to know. She didn't answer my letter, but Uncle wrote me a note in which he said that he knew Lois would do all she could. Jimmy, I had the nicest roommate in the whole school. Raquel looked straight at Jimmy with disarming candor. And Jimmy, mere man that he was foiled by this newly developed astuteness. Raquel had a sense of shame. Never before had she deceived, unless it were unintentionally by silence. A confusion of pressing reasons flooded her mind. If they didn't think enough of Jimmy to let him know, why should she do it? Maybe he'd get a letter any day now. He'd have to go straight where they were then. Oh, he mustn't do that. He mustn't go to Lois again. And she heard herself talking of the war, of her Thanksgiving vacation, and Anne and the Marvin family. Their house was just like a palace inside. But you're used to that. You'd understand them, too. They were just folks. After you got used to their ways, you could see how they were just human beings like us Texans underneath. Jimmy laughed. Well, I guess we are all pretty much alike under the skin. No, we aren't, Jimmy. Take Dad, for instance. He thinks honor is dearer than life, and that justice is his, not the Lord's nor the state's. When he shot those 3 men who killed his dad, he said he was going to get them the same way they got him in the back. And he did, every one of them. When he had to serve 3 years, he didn't complain. Said it was worth it. But he thought a year of his life was worth more to the community than any one of the men living. It was, at that, Jimmy agreed. Well, I think people should pay up for what they do. She said it so fiercely that Jimmy looked at her in mock amazement. They had been talking in low tones, but Dad was reminiscing, and his narrative filled the room. Yes, he recounted, I fit to make this country a place for white men to live in. Indians, varmints, bad men, and killers are pretty near cleaned out. I never thought we'd have to go clear back across them plains, and across the ocean, to a country where cows, I hear, is family pets tied up in the parlor, and men tote knives instead of guns to keep it fittin'. Fightin' is goin' to be a sight different than what we see in the old days, when we fit the Indians and the rustlers. I remember when my father carried me long up into the Carrizozo country in New Mexico. I was about 11-year-old. At the hot springs there, we was set upon by the sneakiest bunch o' Navajos I ever see. We fit for 3 days, never stoppin' to eat more'n a chew of tobaccy. That's why I never could tolerate chewin'. And the only water we had to drink was what we could dip out the boilin' springs and cool in the sun. Then we got out water, and Everett Eames he was a good ol' scout slipped out easy after dark to the springs. We heard a splash and a fearful screech, and Pa says, poor ol' Eames, the varmints have boiled him alive. And just then ol' Eames comes crawlin' in, drippin' and mattern wet wildcats. It was the first time water had touched his hide in nigh on 30 years. and hot at that. By mornin', we had got down to nothin' but rabbit shot, and we was pepperin' away at a bush where a few Indians still held out, when out tumbles a young feller, full o' buckshot, and the fight was over and so was our shot. Well, I spent the rest o' the mornin' pickin', shot out o' that young Navajo's back and Eason, him o' the lead, and he was the gratefulest Indian you ever see. Used to bring me presents every year up till a couple years ago. And I was grateful too, for we needed the shot to go out and get us some breakfast. Them were cruel days in some ways. When this very house was a sort o' fortified hotel still, I was stayin' here and there stopped a sickly-lookin' young feller, real dapper, who had a holler cough. Tuberculosis. In the last stages, I says to myself. From the east he was, he says, and afeard o' shootin' irons. Towards the third day there rode in from the west the sheriff o' Doña Ana County, and from the east the sheriff o' Alamogordo, Lincoln County. They was bent, their man was there and started round the house. The young feller was common, up from the corral when they seed him, and he seed them and was scared stiff, I reckon. He dodged round the corner. We was lookin' out the dinin' room window and we seed the two sheriffs start to stalk him round the house, one side, t'other. The kid came runnin' in, skeered. Never carried a shootin' iron, he said, and I hid him in that very cellar where Russell got shut up this evenin'. The sheriffs ran round the house and shot each other through their 2-gallon hats, and when I opened the cellar door, Billy, the kid had made a clean getaway. Though we never figured how, for I was sittin' on the lid all the time, and there's nary other open in. Well, sir, said Jimmy, amidst the general shout over the story, I never heard you tell that one about the famous boy bandit of New Mexico before. Oh, I got a passel of stories you never heard me tell yet. Old man Daniel's eyes twinkled. Ever tell you about Pico's Bill, and the time he rid a Kansas cyclone clear through these parts and on into Arizona? He came so fast and raised up such a dust, he carried a part o' Texas clear into New Mexico. You seen see it there yet, down in the corner. Pico's Bill he could step clear over that peak yonder and never notice it, accordin' to them that seed him at the time, and he flavored his beans with tarantulas. Amidst the laugh that followed, Ol' Hossfoot Cantner spoke up from the bench by the fireplace where he sat working at a piece of leather, as he always was. I can tell ye a tale more stranger than that, and a true one. You recollect, Jim, that the last bounty the government put on the Custer wolf brought the price on that outlaw's head up to $500. Well, Bill Marston, owner the Bar X, swears or has swore to get that animal for 6 or 7 years past. Bill S. killed a couple litters of the old Lobo, but can't get the wolf himself. He's tore up more prize ewes for Bill, and more yearlings than they could keep track of. 60 sheep one night that bloody devil killed, and et nary a bite hisself. But he's too cute for all of 'em, hunters and trappers. Won't touch pison, won't let his pack bite bait. Smells a trap under a snowfall. Many's the trap he's sprung with his forepaw. I seed him with my field glasses, stricken, as light and powerful as a cat, and then jumpin' away. He's 4 inches between the eyes, and his paws are as big's my hand, and it ain't no trouble at all to him to fell a 2-year-old bull by hisself. Well, Marston's has got a little girl, Ani one left 6 babies. She's up in the mountings last summer durin' the drouth, at the ranger's cabin. Plays with his police dog. Strays off one day and gets lost. But they's a cloud burst bustin'. The drouth that night and the rangers off over the mountain and don't find it out till next mornin'. They starts out on a hunt, fearin' to hope. What with the rain and the wolves? And Bill's scared she's fallen into a trap he rigged for the Lobo. Found the trap sprung all right, but no Lobo, no Ludi. Well, to make a long story short, they finds her, asleep in a cave, with the Custer wolf lion down beside her. Bill shoots, thinking maybe she's dead. But she's all right. Wakes up as the wolf leaps outen the cave, and up over the rocks and gets away again. And the little girl cries after her doggy. Seems she'd been playin' with him in the woods. Give him water when he was caught in the trap. Rolled off a log Bill rigged so he got free. And when the rain burst, the Lobo carries her in his teeth to an ol' lair. Bill swears he'll never set hand nor hound to him again. Well, I always did say there was more dog than coyote in a Lobo, Dad observed. Come on, boys, give us some songs. Let's have some music for remembrance. Mother here looks a little sad. Blushing and scraping, Jommy and Russell got out their mandolin and guitar, and after some tuning and picking, began Russell in a surprisingly sweet light tenor, and Jommy in a disconcerting voice that was trying to be a deep baritone, and would be when he grew to full manhood. A stirring cowboy ballad, an epic of frontier days, the cattle rustler's daughter, a mournful ditty with the tender passion which strikes the sentimental cowboy Russell, and Jommy warbled them all feelingly. Then the soft-eyed angel, sitting back of the others and plucking a vibrant guitar, sang La Paloma and Saber las Olas over the waves. So beautiful a barcarolle that Mom rocked in her chair in time, Dad's foot waved, and everyone swayed to the air. Home again. Raquel, sitting beside her mother, was seeing it all with new eyes. Yet everything was the same. Oh, it was dear. Close to her, yes, that was it. There was Mom, her plain hair combed straight back, her calico dress, her silent ways. Of course, she could see now the difference between Mom and a woman like Mrs. Marvin. The difference in the things she had had. What Mom had gone without all these years. Yet she was sweet, sweet. Almost a pang of jealousy, for Mom swept over Raquel. Who would change Mom for anything? And what would Lowe's Ranches be without Mom? Why, the whole range centered round Mom and her kitchen, and every trail led straight back home. And Dad, he was just as she had always seen him when she shut her eyes and heard him talking as he was now. You loved Dad and obeyed him. Of course, you couldn't do anything with him when he'd made up his mind. Raquel began to realize dimly that there was prejudice in the opinions she'd always accepted as gospel. But he was big. There was nothing petty about Dad. The eyes of his mind saw things from afar just as his eagle blue eyes, accustomed to distances, saw across the mesas, detecting the true water hole from the mirage. Tonight it all seemed more like real living, happier even than on that far-off day when she had left for school. Yet how different it was from life back there. Why, back there Ol' Hossfoot would never get any further than the garage door. He'd never get to set a foot inside the parlor. And nobody would ever know what a wonderful hand with horses he was, nor hear his good stories, nor go to him for advice on almost any subject. For if he didn't know about it firsthand, he'd be sure to have read about it when it was first invented, way back the year of the World's Fair. Jimmy was the one unchanged quantity, the only person that linked up with that other world, her new knowledge of which had laid a claim on her. Someday, of course, she'd like to have some things different at Lowe's Ranchos, now since she'd been back there. Jimmy could understand. And yet he wouldn't go back there now to live if he could. Raquel turned suddenly to him with a shy smile of mutual understanding. Jimmy smiled back and reached out to pat her hand. "I've been waiting all evening for that smile, Raquel," he said. Began to fear it wasn't going to come. "Raquel, give us a tune, can't you, daughter? Let's hear something sweet and sad." Dad remembered that this would be his last night at home for a long time, perhaps a very long time. Indeed, this knowledge weighed on everyone, though no one spoke of it, and no one mentioned that Grant's ship had sailed the day before. "Raquel's awful tired, Father. She's had a hard trip," said Mom. "I don't guess she's even been to her room yet, and I think she ought to get to bed." They were the first words she had spoken since dinner. But when Mom did speak, it was law. Sleepily, they dragged themselves up from before the dying fire. Georgie had already said good night and disappeared. "Mrs." Daniels went with Raquel to her room, leading the way with a kerosene lamp. "Everything's just as you left it, Raquel, 'cept for one thing," she said, shy now at this new Raquel, whom she felt had changed way off at school there in the East. "Oh, Mom. It sure looks lovely." The big, high-ceilinged room, which had been hers since she was a little girl, was both strange and familiar. A warm fire had been kindled in the corner fireplace, so cozy with its raised hearth, where you could dry your boots or toast your cold toes. The crackling flames threw rosy lights on the painted bedroom set. Yes, it was as prettier than she remembered it. Lovely apple greeno. Wait until Anne saw it with sprays of flowers and dull, yellow gold shadows. And now at the windows, which had been bare always, hung chintz curtains, soft yellow, with green and black and dashes of cunning cherry color. "Mom, did you make them?" "Yes'm. Miss Sperry, over in town, at the Emporium, you know. She come out and looked at the furniture and then sent me the goods. The hems aren't so good. I didn't expect to get 'em up till spring. I don't suppose they look anything like those curtains of Anne's you wrote about. Mom, they're just as pretty as any I ever did see." After Mom had said good night, tucking her in and blowing out the light, Raquel lay snugly in bed, enjoying the firelight, looking about, up at the high ceiling where the same old mud dauber's nest still clung in a corner, up over her head where the 5-foot rattlesnake skin was looped around an old musket. It had 12 rattles. She could count them all from where she lay. Then she laughed out loud. It did look funny, a snake skin over a Louis Quinn's bed. She used to think it was Louis Kahn, S., after the store in San Antone. And those dear antlers on each side her dressing table. They didn't go so well either. A wonder Jimmy had never told her. Good old Jimmy. He always gave a fellow a chance to find out for himself. How had he ever stood table manners at Lowe's Ranchos? Especially Russell, though Ole Hossfoot was pretty bad. And how was she ever going to take the place of Dad, and Custer and Grantall 3? But Mom had had to take the place of 3. She had done the work of 3 women without runnin' water for so long, and things must be easier for Mom from now on. Raquel fell into dreamless sleep. Chapter 3, Problems They Were Gone. Raquel and Mom stood at the end of the long veranda running the length of the house and watched the car as it climbed towards the pass. Mom looked like some hurt thing. She was too unconscious of anything but that they had gone to try to hide her feelings. She and Raquel walked side by side back into the house, Georgie following. Raquel put her arm around Mom's waist. She felt strong and tender, and it comforted Mom. Words and caresses were few, but understanding was there. "Georgie." Mom reached out and drew him, the only baby she had left, into her lap, rocking him there tight in her arms. She rocked and rocked till gradually the strain eased and they began to talk about how much milk Ruth was giving and all the jobs Georgie would have to take on. Georgie at 12 was very round of face, very skinny of leg, snubby of nose, and liberally freckled. His 2 front teeth had reached their majority before the rest of him had, thus endowing him with the hated nickname of Tooth. But to Mom, he had not yet lost his pearly baby teeth. "Look after your mother and sister, Georgie," was all that Dad had told him when he said goodbye. "Remember your man breed." Dad had looked strange in a store suit, with a white collar that parted fearlessly each side of his Adam's apple. In his red tie, there gleamed like a cat's eye a huge yellow diamond, purchased from a Mexican refugee. It was the outfit Dad usually wore to bank directors' meetings. Now that he was gone, his flannel shirt hung limply on a nail on the kitchen porch. His famous 2-gallon hat, without which he never left the house, hung beside it. There it would hang till his return. Raquel, looking at it, grinned ruefully. I wish what Dad kept under his hat was there now. Old man Daniels had made plenty of enemies in his time, but there was no one, at the time of our story, who would rather have shot his hat and what was under it, full of holes than A. B. Mayors. It was not only the matter of losing out on fresh range, but that called loan at the bank had filled A. B. so full of poisoned hatred that he would stop at little to get back at the boss of the lazy L. As the Pathfinder, carrying Dad to the railroad station, swooped down through Red Dog and swirled past the saloon, A. B. looked out. Daniel's off to take charge of cattle transportation overseas, reported Red Bailey, the proprietor of the saloon, as the car disappeared in a cloud of dust. Got his gal home from school in the east to run the rancho. Takes more than fancy roppin' and trick ridin' to carry on the cattle biz, remarked A. B. dryly. You said it, Red agreed. A little money comes in handy. A. B. grew an angry red and made an impatient gesture. Then an evil smile came to his face. And at that moment, he knew how he would get back at Bill Daniels. He would strike at him through his girl. A grand chance to get even, if Daniels wanted to be such a fool. Raquel, meanwhile, all unconscious of the forces that were preparing to fight her, was thinking back over her parting conversation with Jimmy. They had gone into the little schoolroom together, so that Jimmy could show her the schoolwork laid out for Georgie that winter. Raquel was wearing a green jersey sports dress, a pretty thing, the most becoming she had slipped into it at the last minute instead of pulling on her ranch clothes. How glad she was Anne had finally persuaded her to buy it. Jimmy pompously took his seat at the teacher's desk, while Raquel squeezed into one of the mutilated old desks which Dad had brought out from town when Grant and Custer were little, so that his children would have all the advantages of real school atmosphere. What's it to be now, Raquel? Jimmy had asked. Oh, I know you've come back to handle a job that releases 3 able-bodied men to go to war. An expression of momentary bitterness pulled at Jimmy's mouth. But how does it all seem, apart from the fact that there's no life like the old ranch? I mean to say, what did you bring back with you from the East, from school, besides some mighty stunning clothes and 3 months? Good schooling. Got any new ideas? Raquel looked puzzled. What did Jimmy mean? She was not particularly analytical. She took things as she found them. She was going to run the ranch, and that was all there was to it. If she could just hang on till Dad's return, that was all she asked. Well, I couldn't exactly get any new ideas about cattle ranching back east, could I? But I can think of one improvement. It seems to me I sort of hanker after a good shower bath and a couple of large porcelain tubs in place of that green tin tugboat we lug around to the warmest fire. Seems that if the lazy L could afford a cattle dip and a couple of pianos. It ought to be able to stand at least one genuine bathtub. Jimmy roared his delight. Well, I'll tell you, Jimmy, it was really a wonderful experience, but somehow it seemed to me that the girls, none of them, had ever had a real responsibility outside of their monthly marks, and what they learned didn't have much real meaning to them because of it. I mean, well, having lived out here, you could just understand how the discoverers and pioneers felt when they found all the new countries of America. And that made me interested in history. The people seemed more real to me, and the growth of a country something about human beings, instead of just dry writing on a page. And I never realized, till then, how easy you had made it for me, Jimmy, tellin' me such interestin' things about the people in history as we went along. So I got fine marks in history, and it was only because I knew their lives. Jimmy's face broke into the smile that had won him the instantaneous liking of the ranch of the Lazy L. It's worth a lot to hear you say that, Raquel. Well, you know. There's nothing I could do would repay what this ranch and this family have done for me. Raquel had a vague feeling of disappointment. Well, Jimmy was so nice, of course he would feel like doing all he could. But she wished he hadn't said that about repaying her that he'd said he taught her, because he wanted to anyway. And Jimmy, strangely at a loss for him, was trying to find words to make his appreciation more personal, to say what she herself had meant to him, and that there wasn't anything he wouldn't do for her. And then it was time to go, and he hadn't said anything. They were blowing the horn outside. He and Raquel hurried out to the Pathfinder, where Dad was already stowing away his grip, the same one that Raquel had taken away to school and had hastily unpacked for Dad's use last night. In the sorrow at parting with Dad, Raquel forgot Jimmy's going. But Jimmy himself thought about his lost opportunity all the way into town and was kicking himself for his stiffness, his tongue-tied stupidity. Chapter 4, Taking Stock. Raquel had been home 2 weeks. It had been, as luck would have it, a busy time from the minute of Dad's going. Jommy had driven Mr. Daniels and Jimmy into town and had come roaring back within an hour and a half at nearly 60 miles an hour, so that even with the handicap of the arroyo to cross, he had to break the Pathfinder down with a skidding of tires that brought Russell and Raquel running from the corrals. Jommy, heady with the freedom of the car, swung carelessly out and, without a backward glance at the steaming radiator, strode off toward the bunkhouse. Raquel went quickly up to the car. The engine was fairly smoking. The tires were hot and showed the wear of the sudden breaking down and skidding. The back tires were gouged with bad stone bruises, and as she and Russell stood there, suddenly one went flat. It had been perforated by a sharp rock. Raquel was furious. She followed quickly down towards the bunkhouse. "Jommy," she called softly, "Jommy. Come here a minute, will you? And to Russell, you go on in and take Mom these packages, will you, Russ? Jommy," as he came up sheepishly, sensing something wrong, "do you think that's the way to treat property the minute Dad's back is turned? Look at the radiator. Not a drop left in it. And on a winter's day at that. Look at the tires. 6 months were taken out of them so you can ride 'em, cowboy, ride 'em. Engine smoking, rear tire flat, got to have a shoe. No need in it. Now, Jommy," looking at him severely, "it is as though you hadn't been through this before and been warned and respectfully requested," which was all too true. Jommy, crestfallen, dejectedly started to tote water for the engine now that it was too late. Jommy was a good mechanic, but he simply couldn't be trusted to run the car, Raquel thought, a bit discouraged. And there was no one else, but herself now to drive. When she went down with Russ to inspect the garage, she found that the lavish supply of oils which had been there when she left for school was almost gone. A couple of spare tires were also missing. Raquel was aghast. "Why, Russ, what's happened to the supply shop?" "Well, ma'am, you know how the old man is. Everyone comes along, ocean to ocean tinturer, shorthorn sports, grubline riders, hunters, politicians, friends, give 'em what they want. Sure, stranger, help yourself. And then after they've filled up on our gas, and your ma's cookin' they're off. And when the ladies have cold-creamed the dust of Lowe's ranchos off their faces, and the hombres have wiped it off their boots, that's the last of us." Raquel could not help but laugh at Russell's rage. "But, Russ, you ought not to fuss that way about strangers eating here. Where else would they eat within 15 or 20 miles? Well, you Westerners is open-handed, but I'm a Yankee come from Kansas, and we don't believe in scatterin'. Let 'em tank up before they come. Well, we're going to save every penny from now on, and we ship 1,000 head March 1st, remember, or not later than the 7th. We'll need it," said Russ. "So little seed this year, and the quail ate up a lot. I've got Angel and Pancho going over all the leather on the place this week, and Jommy Mackin, the rounds of the windmills. Catamounts and coyotes been pretty bad this year, and that Angora goat you set such store by, Raquel, a mountain cat got her and her summer's kidslas see, last month it was. Oh, Russ, she was such a beauty." "What did you do with the pelts?" "Well, the kids was sort o' spoiled, but Angel made a right purty rug for your ma's sittin' room the old she. I got near enough Lobo's skins for a new carriage robe for you, curin' down back the coolin' house now." They went down so that Raquel could see the thick, lustrous pelts, tawny, with flecks of black. "You know," said Russ, "we been lossin' too many cattle this winter." He looked ominous. "What do you mean, Russ?" "Wild animals," Russ nodded. "And more'n that, I'd guess. Last spring, I made sure I counted at least 200 calves over on that plain yonder alone. This fall I can't see more'n half that. Coyotes didn't get 'em all." Raquel laughed. "Why, there's nobody in this country would rustle a calf off Lowe's ranchos. Come on, Russ. I want to show you how I want the grove cleaned up. If it's goin' to be a dry spring, we'll need the reservoir there." The cottonwood grove down in the glen southeast of the house was an oasis in a desert of grass, the heavy white trunks towering up against the blue sky. In summer, it was a green-lighted refuge from the brilliance of the sun, and in the autumn, a golden glory, as though the leaves had been marvelously hammered out of beaten gold. But now the grove was a welter of brushwood, old iron and ranch junk, an old plow, an old buggy, an ancient cart with wooden wheels. And the great reservoir in the center was filled with leaves and twigs. When the rainy season was on, the tiny stream that ran through the glade from the mountains behind it would fill the reservoir. There had been a time when the boys used this tank as a swimming hole, to which the cattle did not seem to object. Raquel had in mind to pipe the overflow from the windmill tank at the house down to the glen, and to rely on wind and rain to keep the reservoir water fresh and renewed. She had been wanting to clean the place out for several years, but while Dad spent lavishly on cars, musical instruments, and upkeep, he had little use for improvements that were out of sight of the house. The house itself had been newly whitewashed in the early fall, and the patio wall given a fresh layer of pink plaster, mixed from a pink silica outcrop in the mountains back of the ranch. Everything else was in excellent shape: pumps, windmills, sheds. Mom had always tended the patio, a small velvet oasis, shut away from desert winds by the pink wall, against which stood vivid hollyhocks. A square of unhealthy grass, the boys considered it, because it was so soft and fine. Here, too, were beds of old-fashioned flowers, with honeysuckle and bougainvillea hanging thick over the cloistered porches. Mom had a gracia in her fingers that made things grow, just as it made bread rise, Raquel often thought, looking disgustedly at a sickly vine of her own planting. But Raquel can sew beautiful. Her seams and hems are so fine you can hardly see 'em, Mom would defend. But I can't make anything a sewing, Mom. Look at the fit of this darn dress. They always seem to turn out very queerly. It was true. So after that, Raquel bought what dresses she had in town. They hadn't been many, for she was only 7 when Ole Hossfoot had brought her down a tiny pair of woolies to wear over her ginghams, and before she was in her teens, she rode on the roundups always in her cowboy rig. It was so that Jimmy was used to seeing her, like a slim boy with clustering dark hair, wearing a sombrero, a bright neckerchief, a leather jacket. Raquel had ridden bareback at 3, and before she was 5 had clambered aboard a cowboy saddle, clinging to the pommel, hard, bare feet thrust into the straps above the stirrups, dark hair flying, eyes round with daring. Dad had forbidden her to ride bareback as she grew older. He was afraid she would climb on a bad bronco someday. She had done so, but not to be thrown. That, however, is a story all to itself. By the time she was 14, her gift for gentling horses had become known throughout the county. There were times when Raquel took the place of a grown man, and in some kinds of work she was better than a man. Her lithe, tireless body could be carried over more ground without wearing out her horse than the heavy weight of a man. And whether the animal was a biter or a bucker, if it had the qualifications of a good cowhorse, Raquel could have it behaving when she rode it. Sometimes she stayed home and helped Mom cook for the hands, and sometimes Mom had a Chinaman out from town to help. Sometimes, as now, she got on with the little Mexican girls, for during the shipping and branding seasons, it took all hands to look after the cattle. The Daniels had not long had so much money. There had been years and years when Mom did everything at the ranch house and carried all her water in from the windmill when the men folks were out on the range, and Dad was his own riding boss, in the saddle sometimes for 20 hours out of the 24. And then one autumn Dad said, "Mom, we got $75,000 reposin in the bank. Let's all take a trip to China or California." So he had drawn $5,000 from the bank, and they stayed in California until it was spent. The boss of Lowe's Ranchos was not up to ring the rising bell herself the morning after Dad's departure. Dad or one of the boys always rang it every morning, at 6 o'clock in winter and 5 in summer. Now it was the crackling of the fire on her hearth that roused Raquel. Panchito Esquibel was slipping quietly out as she opened her eyes. The fires were Georgie's job, but he was now doing the milking, and the young milch cow would give down her milk to no one else. Raquel remembered in a flash, and in a flash came wide awake, with the glorious aliveness of the healthy young. Jumping up, she crossed to the sheepskin rug before the open fire. The crackling tulas gave out an extraordinary amount of heat, and yet over in the corner by her washstand, she could have seen her breath. Tingling with an exhilaration that she had not felt at sea level, she splashed herself with the icy water, and 5 minutes later was pulling on her boots before the fire. Not such riding boots as are found in smart city booteries, but a cowboy's pair, elaborately stitched, and perhaps a trifle quaint as to cut about the toe, but nevertheless beautiful. Breakfast was already on the table when she opened the dining room door. Hot bread, yellow cornmeal and salt pork, stewed dried peaches and coffee. At Raquel's place was a little pitcher of cream. "It's from Ruth," explained Georgie proudly. "I'm goin' to let her sleep in the shed off the summer kitchen from now on. It's gettin' too cold for her." "You certainly are not," said Raquel with a grin. "From there, it would be just a step into the kitchen. You'll be wanting to put old Whitey into the patio next." Georgie clanked out in disgust, his leather chaps concealing the fact that as yet his legs were unbowed in the manner befitting a real cowman. At his heels rattled a murderous-looking pair of spurs, which were in reality so blunt that at best they could only massage old Whitey's hide. In fact, the spurs were just a sort of friendly hint to Whitey as between friends. And being a faithful cowhorse of many years' standing, Whitey always tried to oblige when Georgie gave the signal and would break into a run. Perhaps the run lasted only a few steps before subsiding into an apologetic trot. But at a scratch of the spur, Whitey was off again. "Georgie, you're to ride with Angel over to the second windmill and see if everything's all right." "Mom, why hasn't Alina been up to the house?" "I was down there yesterday, and no one was at home." "I'm going down there right now. I want to see Pancho." Alina Esquivel, Pancho's wife, had lived at Los Ranchos ever since she was a girl. Somewhere there was a strain of proud Spanish blood, and her father had owned his own rancho. He had been a friend of old man Daniel's, and when at his death it was found that the rancho, on which Dad had already loaned him money, was lost on a mortgage, Dad brought the girl back and gave her a home. "I don't know what's come over Alina," said Mom. "She's sort of queer these days. But the little girls are sweet little old things, and Panchito's too young to be mean yet." "I never did take much to Pancho Esquivel, though he's got real purty manners," added Mom. "And it was sort of a pity that Alina couldn't have kept that rancho of her father's. But it wasn't your father's fault that the bank had to take it over for his debts." Seems like Esquivel didn't seem to sense that. He thinks Dad was to blame some way. They think influence should do anything. "Well, I'm going down there now, Mom. I want to go over some things with Pancho." The Esquivel casita, a flat-roofed adobe house, nestled down at the foot of a hill below the corral and faced the Alamos, the cottonwood grove. There seemed to be no one at home, but back of the house Raquel found Panchito asleep in the sun, his back to some empty oil cans. As she stood looking at him, Panchito awoke, rubbed his eyes, and stood up, grinning shyly. His papa and mama had gone in the wagon over to visit a sick tío uncle. They would be back tomorrow, tonight maybe. Si, señorita, the ranchito they had gone to. La Balsa, they had called it, he thought. Raquel pushed one of the oil cans with the toe of her boot. "What does your papa use these for, Panchito?" "Oh, those are just the empty cans." "He has sold already the oil," Panchito answered innocently. "Since the gate below the Alamos was closed there, come by our house, many automobiles." Raquel walked back to the big house thoughtfully. Pancho Esquivel was a bad hombre, all right. And going off like that without a word. He always had an excuse. And there was nothing to do but shrug the shoulders at the institution of a Latin American family and the demands of relatives upon the time of first, second, and third cousins. But this business of the oil, no wonder they couldn't keep oil. What else was Pancho selling? Passing by the bunkhouse, where Angel was sweeping out with a tender regard for the broom, she called to him to saddle the Alesan mare. The horse was a quivering, high-strung creature which Raquel herself had cured of fright, and which she would let no one but herself or Jami ride. Jami was hard on a car, but easy on a critter. Raquel swung quickly into the saddle. It was a pretty thing to watch her mount. There were times when she simply vaulted in, her feet seeming to find the stirrup leathers by instinct. But now, she did not wish to startle the Alezen. Left hand grasping the reins smoothly at the base of the horse's neck, left foot thrust under the stirrup hood, she made a quick upward flight of her slim body, feet together, until the right foot swung quicker than the eye over the saddlet never seemed to sprawl over the horse's flank. She rode with a somewhat shorter stirrup than a good panhandler usually does, and didn't lean back for a lope or a slow trot. This morning, the mare was off like the wind, down the road leading to the pass. Beyond the arroyo, Raquel turned back to the right and followed the road that led past the cottonwood grove, round which ran a fork that joined the main road again beyond the Alamos. The inner road had always been closed with a gate, but now a new gate closed the main road, and the inner road, which led past Pancho's house, was open. Cars would have to go this way now, and the detour could not be seen from the big house. Easy way to make a little money. Raquel was angry as she loped back. But I wouldn't have thought it of Alina. Pancho would never have been hired at Los Ranchos had it not been for Alina. When she married, Dad took Esquivel on because of her, rather than because he was an expert cowpuncher and brander. Well, selling oil could be settled easily enough. But what else was Pancho Esquivel up to? At that moment, Pancho was concluding a very satisfactory sale of La Balsa, the ranchito of Alina's uncle, to A. B. Mayors for a sum satisfactory to both parties, and terms that were most agreeable. The ancient uncle and aunt were to continue to live there the remainder of their lives, and Esquivel was to work the place for A. B on shares. La Balsa was what the name implied, a pocket of land lying in a tiny valley that ran down to the Daniels Range and was entirely surrounded by Los Ranchos property, except on the northwest corner.